The War for Reality. Narrator, Jenny Lin. Liberals claim all truth is relative. This is the same as saying all opinions are fictions. All truths cannot be relative because the claim means there is at least one absolute truth. Truth exists as a conceptual absolute or not at all. If all truths are relative, as the claim asserts, by its terms there is at least one absolute truthful belief, but this is a contradiction. The claim all truths are relative must be a contingent truth, if true, and an absolute truth, if false. This does not make sense. If we reject the absolute, categorical maxim that authorship defines ownership, the axiom on which libertarianism is based, the community requires the state. If we have a state, if we are governed by a state, the people need human rights. Human rights are liberals' answer to how to protect the freedoms of people in opposition to the state. Freedom cannot be based on resources that belong to someone else. We cannot be charitable with someone else's money. There is no valid ownership model if ownership requires the regulatory apparatus of the state. Indeed, all rights and freedoms are illusory, if based on nothing more than the state's maxim that might makes right and the end justifies the means. Ownership is defined by authorship. Every idea and discovery originated as a thought in the mind of a sentient being. Authorship is the only source of equity. Equity is always the product of a single individual mind. Equity is the only thing humans can create and own. We own only what we author. It is authorship that validates ownership. As said, this is restricted to equity. The state is incapable of paying the costs it creates, because the state does not own the assets it claims as its right. The state, on the other hand, prohibits ownership of equity and so creates liabilities. Liberalism turns citizens into subjects. Subjects are people without ownership rights to the equity they create. Subjects have legal rights given to them by the state. This precludes any rights of ownership. Liberals have proprietary rights, but not sovereign rights. Without ownership, there is no freedom. States generate social costs. Social costs turn citizens into subjects. Subjects are wards of the state. According to the claims of the state, it owns what we create. We own what our minds author. There is no right that permits the state to expropriate what belongs to its author. This is the doctrine of negative accountability. Positive accountability requires us to pay for all benefits enjoyed. Money is a unit of account backed by equity. Money is an abstract unit of account created to track changes in equity values. Units of account are quantities that allow transactions to be recorded in credit and debit columns. The credit column records cash in and the debit column records cash out. Cash is equity given a physical form or equivalency. Currency is created by increases in equity and is issued as preferred shares. Preferred shares measure the amount of equity in an economy. If someone builds a birdhouse, this constitutes an asset. The birdhouse is composed of assets plus equity. Equity is the value pertaining to the finished product minus the costs. The builder is entitled to the equity portion of the birdhouse. Equity is assets minus costs or liabilities. E equals AL. The liability is the material cost. The equity portion is the labor value credited to the worker. The equity portion of the asset is issued as preferred shares payable to the account of the author of the equity. In this case, the liability portion represents the natural value of the materials used. When Bill purchases goods or services from Jack, preferred shares in Bill's account are transferred to Jack's account. The sale price is debited the buyer account and the seller account is credited. Starting a business creates a business account. The new business is represented by a ledger. Its capital account is credited with the assets needed to start the business. Those who contribute the assets have their accounts credited with the value they provided. If the business is a bakery, those who contribute assets needed by a bakery are credited the value provided. Those who work for the bakery have their accounts credited for the work they do. Those who purchase bakery products have their account debited. To pay off member debt, bonds may be sold to members. The cash earned is used to purchase member debt from banks. Those buying bonds have their accounts credited with an equal amount of preferred share units, prefers, P, a contraction of preferred shares. No claim on equity created by another is valid without an equal corresponding benefit to the seller provided by the buyer. The war for reality is a war between two different conceptual systems or philosophies. A philosophy is a way of understanding or conceiving of reality. But reality is defined, not by words or ideas, but how we create it through business activity. Philosophers do not define reality for us, businesses do. We can follow faithfully the rules of good business practice or cut corners and cheat. The kind of reality we build is a product of how we do business. We can do business directly, or we can work through the agency and the regulatory apparatus of the state. The UN's Declaration of Human Rights is a model legal rights statement. The UN Declaration lays out what rights a state can and ought to provide. These rights are not consistent with the needs or role of business. Ultimately, rights benefit the state. Human rights do not create or provide a philosophy of business. In short, human rights and the needs of business are incompatible. Virtually all of us assume rights exist. Regardless of what rights we are talking about, they are grounded in the power of the state. The right of the state to define our rights is founded on the maxim that might makes right and the end justify the means. If the state cannot dominate its subjects by maintaining a monopoly on power, legal rights are of no effect. The state cannot provide rights to its subjects unless it has a monopoly on power. What this means is that the doctrine of human rights forces business into the role of an agency of the state and a medium through which the power of the state is expressed. This is not the reality of business. Our role as business people is to serve citizens. Apriorian teaches businesspersons how to do business irrespective of the state. It is said we cannot serve two masters. Nowhere is this truer than in business. The question all businesspersons must ask is if they are catering to the power needs of the state or the needs of business. The business-focused life is the life of a libertarian. Libertarians are people who express their purpose through the agency of business, apart from the state. All libertarians must ask themselves, does the work they do serve the interests of the state and its agents, for example the banks and tax collectors, or the needs of citizens? If centralization of power is not good for the community, it is not good, for the same reasons, in business. Every transaction happens between a buyer and a seller. Do you need a state between what you supply and what the market demands? The simplest and most direct exchange is that between businesses. If a business needs to have their driveway to be cleared of snow, there ought to be a business available to do this. What if a pipe is leaking or a publisher for a song is required? These are products and services. Everything a person needs is a demand for a good or service. The need is a potential sale. Libertarians claim to be business-orientated. But to what degree? Is your ability to give and get business being hindered by the state and its regulatory apparatus? The state tells you that you cannot supply X, Y, and Z. Regulations require M to be supplied under conditions R. There may be good reasons why these goods and services ought not be provided or provided in the way specified, but the state's monopoly on power is not one of those good reasons. Libertarians are in a way for freedom. The freedom is liberty from the regulatory power of the state. Business is the prisoner, and it is through freeing business activity that we become free of the state. Libertarians are in a war with the state, and the land we fight over is business. Apriorian has the tools needed to eliminate the regulatory power of the state over business. Visit our webpage for more information.